What happens when the ruthless CEO of Wall Street's most vicious equity firm realizes his bitter rival's heavily guarded secret Omega is the boy he left behind 10 years ago. Secret's corporate blackmail and an alpha's feral possessiveness collide in a scandal that will burn the city to the ground. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan was suffocatingly opulent, a sea of tailored tuxedos, glittering diamonds, and the clashing, arrogant scents of New York's most powerful alphas. Alistair Covington, the 32-year-old billionaire CEO of Covington Capital, stood by a towering pillar of white orchids, nursing a glass of Macallan 25, and looking utterly bored. Known across the financial sector as a corporate butcher, Alistair was a prime alpha who dismantled legacy corporations for sport. He was cold, calculating, and notoriously unmated. He despised these charity galas, but tonight was different. Tonight he was here to observe his greatest enemy. Nathaniel Hayes, the golden boy of Silicon Valley and CEO of Hayes Innovations, had just relocated his headquarters to New York. For 3 years, Nathaniel and Alistair had been locked in a brutal war over market dominance, sniping acquisitions, and sabotaging each other's stock prices. But recently, a new rumor had consumed the elite circles. Nathaniel, who had always paraded a string of high-profile betas for the paparazzi, had supposedly acquired a secret Omega, not just a casual companion, but a highly guarded, unregistered Omega kept entirely out of the public eye. Tonight was the first time Nathaniel was rumored to bring him into the light. Alistair sneered, taking a slow sip of his scotch. He couldn't care less about Nathaniel's bedroom politics. He was here to intercept a board member from a tech startup Nathaniel was trying to acquire. But as Alistair moved through the crowd, expertly dodging the desperate pheromones of unmatched Omegas and the posturing of lesser alphas, something stopped him dead in his tracks. It was a scent. Faint at first, buried beneath the overwhelming stench of expensive French perfume, roasted duck from the catering trays, and the sharp tang of alpha dominance. But as a pair of double doors to the VIP lounge swung open, a sudden draft caught the scent and carried it straight to Alistair. Rain on hot asphalt, crushed mint leaves, a hint of vanilla so pure it made the back of Alistair's teeth ache. Alistair's heavy crystal glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. He didn't even flinch. His pupils blew wide, his irises bleeding into a feral glowing gold. It was a scent he hadn't breathed in over a decade, a scent he thought had been lost to the coastal winds of his childhood town. Oliver. Before Alistair had inherited his estranged father's empire, before he was a billionaire, he was just a teenage boy in a rundown seaside town. And Oliver Finch had been his entire world. They had spent their youths entangled in the tall grass, whispering promises of the future. But when Alistair presented as a prime alpha at 18, his wealthy father's security team had forcibly dragged him away to New York to be groomed for the family dynasty. By the time Alistair had fought his way to power and returned to find Oliver, the boy was gone. The Finch family home was boarded up, their debts sold off, and Oliver had vanished without a trace. For 10 years, Alistair's inner alpha had howled for its missing half. Ignoring the startled gasps of the socialites around him, Alistair shoved past a group of Wall Street bankers. His alpha presence flared a heavy, suffocating wave of dark cedar and ozone that forced weaker alphas to physically step back and bare their necks in submission. He followed the trail of rain and mint, his heart hammering against his ribs like a sledgehammer. He breached the corridor leading to the private balconies. The lighting here was dim, the music from the ballroom muffled. At the far end of the hall, flanked by 2 massive private security guards in charcoal suits, stood Nathaniel Hayes. And standing slightly behind Nathaniel, wrapped in an oversized suit jacket that swallowed his slender frame, was an Omega. Alistair's breath hitched. It was him. Oliver Finch was older, the soft curves of his youth sharpened into breathtaking elegance. His unruly sandy blonde hair was perfectly styled, and his wide, doe-like eyes held a mixture of deep sorrow and exhaustion. But what made Alistair's blood run cold, what made a deep, terrifying growl tear from his throat, was the heavy leather collar strapped around Oliver's neck. It was a claiming collar, thick and restrictive, bearing the silver insignia of Hayes Innovations. Nathaniel was leaning in, whispering something harsh into Oliver's ear. Oliver flinched, nodding meekly, his hands trembling as he clutched a champagne flute. Hayes. Alistair's voice was a lethal rumble that echoed down the hallway. Nathaniel turned, his polished smile instantly dissolving into a sneer as he recognized his rival. Covington, I see you've managed to drag yourself out of your cave. Did you lose another acquisition today, or are you just here to drink the free liquor? Alistair didn't look at Nathaniel. His golden eyes were locked entirely on Oliver. The moment Oliver saw him, the champagne flute slipped from his hands, shattering just as Alistair's had moments before. The sharp smell of mint spiked with sheer, unadulterated panic. Alistair! Oliver breathed the word barely a whisper, yet it struck Alistair like a physical blow. Nathaniel's eyes darted between the two of them, his posture stiffening as his own alpha instincts flared, recognizing the sudden, dangerous territorial shift in Alistair's pheromones. You know my Omega? Nathaniel demanded, his hand snapping out to grip Oliver's wrist, yanking him closer. Alistair's vision literally tinted red. The sight of Nathaniel's hand on Oliver's skin triggered an ancient primal violence deep within his cerebral cortex. Take your hand off him, Alistair ordered. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha command, laced with such heavy pheromonal pressure that the two security guards physically stumbled. Nathaniel, a prime alpha himself, grit his teeth against the pressure, though a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Have you lost your mind, Covington? This is my legally registered Omega. You step back, or I will have you arrested for assault. Oliver whimpered, the sound tearing at Alistair's soul. Alistair, please, Oliver begged softly, his eyes swimming with tears. Please go. Don't do this. He was protecting him. Even now, trapped in a collar and trembling in the shadow of a tyrant, Oliver was trying to protect Alistair from a scandal. Alistair's jaw clenched so tight he tasted blood. He forced his inner beast to heal, masking his lethal intent behind the cold, dead-eyed glare that made him the most feared man on Wall Street. Enjoy the gala, Hayes, Alistair whispered, his voice dangerously soft. He looked at Oliver one last time, promising a war with his eyes. I'll be seeing you. The penthouse office of Covington Capital at One World Trade Center was bathed in the harsh blue light of dawn. Alistair hadn't slept. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the sleeping city, his mind operating at a terrifying, hyper-focused speed. His tie was discarded, his sleeves rolled up, and his office smelled heavily of distressed alpha pheromones, sharp cedarwood, and impending thunderstorms. Talk to me, Alistair commanded, without turning around, as the heavy glass doors to his office opened. Thomas Reed, Alistair's chief fixer and lead investigator, walked in holding a thick encrypted tablet. Thomas was a beta immune to the heavy choking pheromones flooding the room, but even he looked pale. I pulled every private record, financial disclosure and medical escrow account linked to Oliver Finch and Hayes Innovations, Thomas said, setting the tablet on Alistair's mahogany desk. It's a bloodbath, Alistair. It's entirely legal, but it is a bloodbath. Alistair turned, his golden eyes narrowing. Explain. 7 years ago, Oliver's mother was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. Thomas explained, pulling up a series of bank statements from Chase and Goldman Sachs. The Finch family had nothing. They went to a private high-risk medical lending firm to secure the experimental treatments to keep her alive. That firm was secretly a subsidiary shell company owned by Nathaniel Hayes. Alistair's hands gripped the edge of his desk. Hayes trapped him in debt. Worse, Thomas corrected grimly. When Oliver's mother passed away, the debt defaulted. The principal had ballooned to nearly $4 million due to predatory interest rates. Hayes approached Oliver personally. He offered to wipe the debt, save Oliver's father from federal prison for financial fraud, and provide them a monthly stipend. In exchange, Oliver had to sign a binding Omega servitude contract. He is legally bound to Hayes for the next 10 years. Hayes holds the deed to his life, Alistair. Alistair stared at the digital signatures on the screen. The neat, familiar handwriting of the boy he loved forced into signing his life away to a monster. The collar, the panic, the way Oliver had begged him to walk away. He isn't mated, Alistair stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. I smelled him. There is no bite. The collar is just a physical restraint. He's unbitten, but legally he belongs to Hayes. If you try to take him by force, Hayes will execute the penalty clauses. Oliver's father goes to prison, and Oliver will be locked in a federal Omega facility for breach of contract. Hayes has checkmated him. Alistair laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound that echoed terribly in the large office. Hayes thinks he's playing chess. He doesn't realize I'm about to flip the entire board. Alistair looked up at Thomas, his eyes burning with an unholy fire. Liquidate our assets in the European tech sector. Pull the $2 billion we have sitting in the Vanguard escrow. I want you to initiate a hostile takeover of Hayes Innovations. Buy out his board members, blackmail his silent partners, short his stock until it bleeds. I want his company dismantled by Friday. Thomas swallowed hard. Alistair, a hostile takeover of that magnitude. It will cost us billions. It could destabilize Covington Capital entirely. The SEC will be swarming us. I don't care if I have to burn this entire company to the bedrock. Alistair roared, his fist slamming onto the desk, fracturing the thick glass surface. Get it done. 72 hours later, the financial world was in a state of absolute hysteria. Covington Capital had launched the most aggressive, ruthless corporate blitzkrieg in Wall Street history. Hayes Innovations stock plummeted by 40% in 2 days. Board members were suddenly resigning, citing personal scandals that Alistair had quietly unearthed and leveraged against them. On Thursday morning, Alistair bypassed the front desk of Hayes Innovations' corporate headquarters. He didn't come with a legal team. He came alone, his presence so overwhelming that the beta security guards stepped aside, too intimidated by his prime alpha aura to stop him. Alistair kicked open the double doors of the executive boardroom. Nathaniel Hayes was pacing furiously at the head of the long glass table, screaming into a phone. When the doors slammed against the walls, he dropped the phone, his face twisting in rage. "You son of a bitch!" Nathaniel snarled. "You're destroying my company." But Alistair wasn't looking at him. Sitting quietly in the corner of the boardroom, a legal notepad resting on his knees, was Oliver. He looked paler than before, the heavy leather collar stark against his bruised skin. When he looked up and met Alistair's eyes, a soft, heartbreaking scent of rain flooded the room, carrying a desperate plea. "I'm not destroying your company, Nathaniel," Alistair said, stepping fully into the room and locking the doors behind him with a sharp click. "I am buying it. As of 10 minutes ago, I acquired a 51% controlling stake through anonymous proxy firms. I own Hayes Innovations. I own your patents. I own your shell companies." Alistair walked slowly toward the head of the table, his eyes fixed on Oliver. "And I own the debt contracts you hold." Nathaniel's face drained of color. He lunged forward, placing himself between Alistair and Oliver. "He is my Omega. You can buy my company, Covington, but you cannot buy a registered bond. The contract is ironclad." "I don't need to buy it," Alistair murmured, stopping mere inches from Nathaniel. The air in the room grew heavy, the atmospheric pressure dropping as Alistair released his true, unbridled alpha dominance. It was crushing. Nathaniel's knees visibly buckled, a strangled gasp escaping his throat as his body betrayed him, forcing him to submit to a superior apex predator. Alistair stepped around the trembling CEO and knelt in front of Oliver. He gently reached out his large, warm hand, cupping Oliver's cheek. Oliver let out a shattered sob, leaning into the touch, his scent exploding with a mixture of overwhelming relief and terrifying hope. "I told you I'd come back for you," Alistair whispered, his thumb brushing a stray tear from Oliver's eye. "Take off the collar, Oliver. You're going home." The interior of Alistair's armored Aston Martin was suffocatingly quiet as it tore down the FDR drive, the Manhattan skyline blurring past the tinted windows. Oliver sat curled against the passenger door, his knees pulled to his chest, trembling violently. The heavy leather collar was gone, abandoned on the glass table of the Hayes Innovations boardroom. But Oliver's pale fingers kept ghosting over his throat, tracing the bruised, raw skin left behind. Alistair gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His inner alpha was clawing at his ribs, frantic and volatile, demanding he pull the car over, drag Oliver into his lap, and scent him until every trace of Nathaniel's foul artificial pine pheromones was obliterated. But Alistair held back. He rolled the windows down a fraction, letting the sharp, icy air of the Hudson River dilute the overwhelming tension in the cabin. "We're going to my private residence in Tribeca," Alistair said, his voice a low, soothing rumble, intentionally pitched to calm a distressed Omega. "It's a secure building. No press, no corporate espionage, and absolutely no alphas other than myself. You are safe, Oliver. I swear it on my life." Oliver let out a ragged breath, the scent of crushed mint and rain spiking with a bitter undercurrent of fear. "He's going to ruin you, Alistair. You don't understand the reach Nathaniel has. The contracts." "I wiped his company off the map," Alistair interrupted, softly reaching across the console to gently rest his hand over Oliver's trembling fingers. The contact sent a jolt of electricity up Alistair's arm. "Whatever debt you owed him, it belongs to me now. And I am voiding it the second my legal team files the paperwork." They arrived at the penthouse, a sprawling, ultra-modern fortress of glass steel and dark marble overlooking the city. Alistair immediately summoned his private physician, a discreet beta named Dr. Harrison from Mount Sinai Hospital, to examine Oliver's neck and run a full toxicology panel. While Oliver was being tended to in the guest wing, Alistair paced his private study, downing his second glass of scotch. The heavy oak doors opened, and Thomas Reed slipped inside his face, unreadable. He securely locked the door behind him and placed a thick manila folder on Alistair's desk. "Doctor, Harrison says he's malnourished and suffering from acute pheromonal suppression, likely forced to take illegal beta blockers to keep his Omega nature subdued in public, but he will recover," Thomas reported. He hesitated, his hand lingering on the folder. "Alistair, while we were seizing the physical servers at Hayes Innovations, I found a hidden encrypted partition. It wasn't just medical debt Nathaniel was using to blackmail Oliver." Alistair froze the glass of scotch, pausing halfway to his lips. "Explain." Thomas opened the folder, revealing a stack of heavily redacted bank transfers wire receipts from offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and a signed affidavit. 7 years ago, when the Finch family went bankrupt, it wasn't due to poor investments. The market was deliberately manipulated. Someone systematically targeted your father-in-law's, Oliver's father's small shipping firm. They orchestrated a massive short-selling campaign, bought up his supply chains, and starved him out. Alistair's golden eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Your father," Thomas said softly. The silence in the study was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city traffic, hundreds of feet below. "Arthur Covington." Thomas continued pointing to the documents. "Found out you were still secretly communicating with Oliver during your first year at Harvard. He decided to sever the tie permanently. He bankrupted the Finch family. But worse, he framed Oliver's father for federal wire fraud to ensure they would never recover. That's why Oliver's mother couldn't afford her cancer treatments." A cold, creeping horror began to spread through Alistair's veins. His father, the man whose empire he had inherited, had destroyed the life of the only boy Alistair had ever loved. "Nathaniel Hayes found the paper trail 2 years ago," Thomas explained grimly. "He confronted Oliver with it. If Oliver ever tried to contact you, or if he refused to sign the servitude contract, Nathaniel threatened to hand the evidence to the SEC and the FBI. He told Oliver that exposing Arthur Covington's crimes would tear down Covington Capital, freeze all your assets, and potentially send you to federal prison as the current CEO and inheritor of the estate." The glass in Alistair's hand shattered for the second time that week. The jagged crystal bit into his palm, drawing blood. But he didn't feel it. The sheer, blinding agony of realization hit him like a freight train. Oliver hadn't just sacrificed his freedom for his family. He had worn a collar, endured Nathaniel's abuse, and lived in a gilded cage of terror for years, all to protect Alistair's legacy. To protect him. Alistair shoved past Thomas, his vision swimming with red. He tore down the hallway, bursting into the guest bedroom. Oliver was sitting on the edge of the plush king-sized bed, wearing one of Alistair's oversized cashmere sweaters. He looked up, his doe eyes widening at the sight of Alistair's bloody hand and the feral, unrestrained grief radiating from his alpha scent. "Alistair, what's wrong? You're bleeding." Before Oliver could stand, Alistair crossed the room and dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor. The ruthless, untouchable billionaire of Wall Street buried his face into Oliver's lap, his broad shoulders shaking. "You should have let him ruin me." Alistair choked out his voice, breaking as he wrapped his arms around Oliver's waist, burying his face in the soft wool of the sweater. "You should have let him burn my father's empire to the ground. Why did you protect me? Look what it cost you." Oliver gasped, his hands freezing midair. He realized instantly that Alistair knew the truth. Slowly trembling, Oliver lowered his hands, threading his fingers through Alistair's dark hair. The sweet, pure scent of rain and vanilla flooded the room, wrapping around Alistair's distressed pheromones like a warm blanket. "Because I loved you," Oliver whispered, a tear slipping down his cheek and splashing onto Alistair's suit jacket. "I always loved you, and I couldn't let them take your future away too." The fallout was biblical. By Monday morning, Nathaniel Hayes had weaponized his legal team. Refusing to accept defeat, Nathaniel enlisted the most aggressive corporate litigators in New York from Skadden Arp's slate, Mega and Flom. They filed an emergency federal injunction in the Southern District of New York claiming Alistair's hostile takeover was built on corporate espionage. Worse, Nathaniel tipped off the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, feeding them anonymous breadcrumbs about Arthur Covington's historical market manipulation. Nathaniel's strategy was clear. If he couldn't have his company and his Omega back, he was going to trigger mutually assured destruction. Alistair stood in the center of the Covington Capital boardroom, flanked by his own army of lawyers. Outside the glass walls, the trading floor was in chaos. The media was in a frenzy, and Covington Capital's stock was beginning to hemorrhage value as rumors of a federal probe leaked to the press. "We need to settle," Alistair's lead counsel urged, wiping sweat from his forehead. If the FBI formally opens an investigation into your father's old ledgers, they will freeze our operational capital. We won't be able to make payroll. Hayes is demanding the return of his voting shares and the immediate enforcement of the Omega contract. No, Alistair's voice was absolute. He buttoned his suit jacket, his golden eyes cold and hollowed out, resembling a shark staring at bleeding prey. We do not negotiate with terrorists. I want a press conference set up in the main lobby in 20 minutes. Invite Bloomberg, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. Alistair, what are you doing? Thomas hissed, stepping forward. I am cutting out the infection, Alistair replied smoothly. 20 minutes later, the grand marble lobby of One World Trade Center was packed with blinding camera flashes and shouting reporters. Alistair walked to the podium, his posture impeccably straight, exuding a dominant, terrifying calm. Standing just out of frame, shielded by Thomas and a wall of private security, was Oliver. He watched Alistair, with bated breath, his heart pounding against his ribs. Good morning. Alistair's voice boomed over the microphones, instantly silencing the room. Over the past 72 hours, a narrative has been spun by my former competitor, Nathaniel Hayes. He alleges illegal business practices. Today I am standing before you to confirm that he is right. A collective gasp echoed through the lobby. Thomas closed his eyes in despair. Oliver stepped forward, a soft whimper escaping his lips. However, Alistair continued, his eyes locking onto the cameras. These practices were not committed by me, but by my predecessor, Arthur Covington. For years, Nathaniel Hayes has possessed undeniable proof of Arthur Covington's financial crimes. Instead of reporting them to the authorities, Mr. Hayes used this evidence to extort blackmail and illegally enslave a private citizen under a fraudulent Omega contract. Alistair pulled a sleek silver hard drive from his pocket and held it up. I have already forwarded the decrypted contents of this drive to the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the SEC. It contains the proof of my father's crimes, as well as the undeniable paper-trailed evidence of Nathaniel Hayes's extortion ring, predatory medical lending, and gross violations of the Omega Protection Act. The lobby erupted into absolute bedlam. Reporters screamed questions, shoving their recorders forward. Alistair had just committed corporate suicide. By voluntarily handing over the evidence, he was subjecting his own company to massive federal fines, restructuring, and the total destruction of his father's legacy. He had burned his own empire to ensure Nathaniel burned with it. Alistair didn't answer a single question. He stepped down from the podium, walked directly to Oliver, and wrapped a protective arm around the Omega's waist. He guided them toward the private elevators, leaving the chaos behind. You threw it all away, Oliver whispered, as the elevator door slid shut, sealing them in quiet privacy. His eyes were wide with shock. Alistair, your company, your wealth. The company will survive. We'll pay the fines, restructure, and wash my father's name off the building, Alistair murmured, pulling Oliver flush against his chest. He buried his nose in the crook of Oliver's neck, right over the scent gland that was finally pulsing with a healthy, vibrant aroma of rain and sweet mint. I don't care about the money, Oliver. I only care about this. Alistair tilted Oliver's chin up, forcing their eyes to meet. The heavy, possessive instinct of the alpha roared to the surface, no longer suppressed by corporate politics or fear. He can never touch you again. The blackmail is gone. You belong to no one. Alistair's voice dropped an octave rough and desperate. Unless you want to. Oliver's breath hitched. 10 years of separation trauma and heartache melted away beneath the searing golden heat of Alistair's gaze. Oliver bared his neck, a deep instinctual submission driven not by fear, but by absolute, unwavering love. Claim me. Oliver breathed, his fingers digging into Alistair's shoulders. Please, Alistair, make me yours. Legally. biologically. Forever. A growl tore from Alistair's throat. He pressed Oliver back against the polished steel wall of the elevator. His lips brushed over the sensitive skin of Oliver's scent gland, savoring the shudder that ripped through the Omega's body. Then, with a surge of primal devotion, Alistair sank his teeth into the flesh. The bond snapped into place like a lightning strike. A rush of euphoria, blinding and absolute, flooded their senses. Their pheromones collided, fusing the sharp, protective cedar with the soothing, pure scent of rain, creating an entirely new, unbreakable harmony. By the time the elevator reached the penthouse, Nathaniel Hayes was already being escorted out of his office in handcuffs by federal agents. The war was over. The ruthless Alpha CEO had lost his father's dark legacy. But as he carried his newly bonded mate across the threshold of their home, he knew he had finally won everything that truly mattered. Alistair literally burned his billion-dollar legacy to the ground just to set his Omega free, proving that a true Alpha's greatest asset isn't his wealth, but his mate. The downfall of Nathaniel Hayes is the ultimate, satisfying revenge, closing this intense chapter of secrets, blackmail, and undeniable love. If you were captivated by Alistair and Oliver's harrowing journey from corporate warfare to soul-binding romance, make sure to hit that like button, share this story with your fellow Omegaverse fans, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling BL dramas